How to eliminate bloating with these simple daily habits. Imagine starting your day with a flat stomach and ending your day with a flat stomach with no bloating in between. Well, you don't just have to imagine. Using these tips in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly what you can do to eliminate bloating from your life completely. Hi there, welcome back to the channel. My name's Reese. I work specifically with people to get to the root cause of their reflux and their bloating. And while we're often getting to the root cause of that bloating, which we call dysbiosis, an imbalance between the positive and the opportunistic bacteria that live inside the bowel, we'll cover that in more details. I want to give you some tips that you can have if you're someone who bloats on a regular basis, first thing in the morning, right into the evening, every time you eat. If that sounds like you, these tips are going to be super useful. So the root cause of bloating is what we call dysbiosis. Dysbiosis, from the Greek meaning bad life, is an imbalance between the positive bacteria and the opportunistic bacteria that live inside your bowel. Now, most people will refer to this as good bacteria and bad bacteria. But in my experience, there's very few bad bacteria, and bloating is the least of your troubles if you have some of those bad bacteria inside your system. So what we have is beneficial bacteria, which is most of the bacteria inside your system. And then you have the stuff that's more opportunistic, that when allowed to grow can cause problems. So bacteria such as Klebsiella is one. You can have fungus that is opportunistic, like Candida is another really opportunistic bacteria that can cause a lot of acid reflux, and that's why we use a lot of herbs like yeast purge to try and kill that Candida. So there's not stuff that's going to be taking over unless it's allowed to grow, and that's when you get problems of eating the wrong foods and you get yeast overgrowth because you're feeding the bacteria that overgrow, and then it causes problems for you. Now, when you have this dysbiosis, it's very important that you eat the right foods, because the right foods will help grow your beneficial bacteria. We call those prebiotic foods, and we'll cover some of those in a second. But you've got to eat the right foods, because you're either eating the right foods or you're eating the wrong foods. And if you're unsure about which ones you should be eating, generally, if it's ultra processed, it's a no. Everything else is a yes. But let me give you some examples. So there are certain foods that contain fiber that are going to feed your gut bacteria. Now, that's generally the fruits and the vegetables, but there are certain fruits and veggies that can cause more disruption to your gut than others if you don't have enough of the right bacteria to break them down. And those are foods that are generally very high in starch, like chickpeas, or variations of beans. You might be a person who finds that when you eat chickpeas, some sort of hummus dish, or when you eat dishes that contain beans, especially kidney beans, that you can bloat really badly. And again, that's because you don't have enough of the bacteria and the enzyme to break those foods down yet, but they can be built, and I'll show you how. We also know that raw and cold food can be really difficult to digest. So if you're someone who suffers from a lot of bloating when you're eating a lot of vegetables, I would recommend that you cook them thoroughly. Now, I know what you're thinking, there's going to be no minerals left if I cook my vegetables thoroughly, but we don't actually get any minerals from our vegetables. We get the majority of minerals from our meats and from our fish and from our eggs. So don't worry too much about mineral degradation when cooking your vegetables. You're going to make it much easier to digest and reduce the chance of you getting bloating. Another tip is that you want to put your system in what we call a rest and digest state before you start to eat. This is really important to improve stomach acid, to improve digestive enzyme flow, and to keep your system low in stress while you eat. This is going to eliminate the chance of you getting bloating when you're feeling like you're rushing around. So we call that the rest and digest state, or we call that the parasympathetic nervous system. And the easiest way to put your system into that parasympathetic dominant state is to take 5 deep breaths before you eat. Another one would be to sit down and eat meals at a table. So you don't really want to eat in front of the TV, you don't want to eat standing up, you don't want to eat rushing around, and you don't want to eat at your desk. I always recommend you go to a table, you sit down and you concentrate on what you're doing. Try not to be scrolling through thousands of TikTok videos, thousands of YouTube videos while you're eating. You want to concentrate on your food. Another tip would be to avoid cold water on an empty stomach. I'm not exactly sure why this causes bloating, but I work with enough people who've told me that when they consume cold water first thing on an empty stomach, it definitely causes bloating. So a couple of things to try. 1, make the water slightly lukewarm. I think that's probably the best idea. It doesn't necessarily have to be hot, although I think hot will probably be better, but even lukewarm, just make sure it's not cold. And I also wouldn't take large amounts of water before you eat. You'll slightly dilute your stomach acid, which impacts all of your digestion further down the line. Using the wrong probiotics is a huge cause of bloating for a lot of people, so let me show you how to navigate this problem. First, probiotics come from the Greek meaning pro-life. Now, probiotic is technically a bacteria in a capsule that confers a benefit to a host. Now, if you take the wrong probiotic, you are going to cause more problems. Remember, you have a microbiome, which is a collection of various different bacteria, archaea, and fungi. If you add the wrong one into the system, you'll annoy all of the others. What I like to do with my clients is I'll test specifically before I ever give anyone probiotics. Otherwise, you're adding in the wrong thing that you don't necessarily need, and that can make your bloating significantly worse. I also recommend that when you use probiotics, you try not to use single strains for too long a period. What you're going to do is effectively try and monoculture your microbiome that needs to be diverse. So if you end up taking the same type of lactobacillus bacteria, for example, and you take it over and over and over again for years and years and years, that's probably not a good idea. It has to then compete with all the bacteria inside your system, and it also won't last unless you feed it the right things. Tip number 5 to reduce your bloating is to add in prebiotics. But again, you have to be very, very careful when you add in prebiotics. So prebiotics are the food that feed the bacteria inside your system. So it's a good idea that if you're going to take a probiotic, which is a beneficial bacteria, it is a good idea to take a prebiotic alongside it so that it can feed that bacteria and it has more chance of staying in your system. But when you take prebiotics, you also feed the beneficial bacteria inside your system that you currently already have. And that's my preferred way to do it for most of the people I work with. I very rarely use extra probiotic strains unless you're missing some we know we should definitely have as humans. I prefer to use prebiotic fibers to feed what we already have and increase the amounts. The problem with prebiotics is that you need to match it to the specific type of bacteria that you need. For example, we might use human milk oligosaccharides to grow bifidobacterium. We might use lactulose or PHGG to grow lactobacillus bacteria. We might use inulin or chicory root to grow things like Faecalibacterium presnitski or roseburia. So again, if you pair the right prebiotic with the bacteria you're trying to grow, you're going to get a better result. One more thing to note about prebiotics is that you're adding fiber into your system, you must go very slowly. If you add in too much fiber too quickly, it can make your bloating worse, it can make you constipated, it can give you a whole lot more digestive issues. So whenever you're trying to change that microbiome, my recommendation is to go very slowly. Another tip that I use with my clients to reduce bloating is to use what we call red light therapy. So you have near and infrared light that also acts as an anti-inflammatory on that digestive system. We find shining that light 10 to 15 minutes per day on that area is really, really useful to kind of reduce the instant inflammation that people can get sometimes after eating foods. It works best when you combine it with some of the other tips in this video. I'm not sure it would work by itself if you keep triggering the bloating. Another tip is to use herbs for bloating. So some herbs have been shown to be fantastic at reducing things like flatulence, which is the buildup of gas, and bloating after you've eaten certain foods. Herbs like fennel and aniseed and caraway and even things like Swedish digestive bitters can be useful to take either before or after your meal if you know that this meal gives you bloating, as well as trying to avoid the foods temporarily that you know cause you problems. Now, earlier we spoke a little bit about activating the parasympathetic or the rest and digest state before you eat to reduce the chance of digestive problems. One of the easiest ways to do that and add in more parasympathetic activities inside your life is to do things like yoga and deep breathing. Most of the time you should be in that parasympathetic rest and digest state, and most people are running around in what we call the fight or flight mode, which is also known as the sympathetic dominant mode. If you're in that state and you try to eat, you're going to get a lot more digestive problems than if you can calm that system right down. Remember, for the most part, you want to be rest and digest. Another tip that you can use to reduce bloating is to eat slower. What I normally recommend for my clients is that they take at least 20 minutes to eat their meals. Now that can be tricky for a lot of people who are used to eating quite quickly. I recommend you set a timer and then make sure you're regularly checking on it to make your meals last at least 20 minutes. If you do that, you are going to improve your digestion significantly. You're also probably less likely to overeat when you do that. Remember, digestion begins with the eyes and the nose and the mouth. When you smell food, when food looks more attractive, when you chew your food more, you're going to improve your digestive system, and that will help all of the other digestive organs further downstream, which is likely to reduce your chance of bloating. Another herb that is fantastic for bloating is peppermint. Although not so great if you have acid reflux, I'd avoid peppermint gum because it can interfere with that lower esophageal sphincter. If you're bloated, low doses of peppermint have been shown to be fantastic in studies where people have IBS and can help reduce a little flatulence as well. I recommend taking it as part of a peppermint tea, but again, start with a very, very slow dose. Not everybody responds to peppermint the same. Another tip that you can use to reduce bloating is to take digestive enzymes. Now, your pancreas is responsible for most of the enzyme production inside the body, but if, for example, you don't have sufficient stomach acid, you won't make sufficient pancreatic enzymes. And if you don't break down the food fully in the small intestine, some of it can be left over to ferment in large intestine, and that can cause bloating in a lot of people. I recommend taking digestive enzymes before you eat. You don't want to take them after because they want to be in your system before the food gets there. You want your enzymes in the duodenum, in the small intestine, before your food gets there. And you want enzymes to contain things like protease and lipase and amylase, which are the main three digestive enzymes that are going to help you break down your food. And finally, sometimes with my clients who bloat on a regular basis, I like to use herbs like curcumin that help lower inflammation. They have antioxidant properties, anti-cancer properties, anti-inflammation properties, and curcumin is a fantastic herb. It is the extract from turmeric. Now, I find that when you take the turmeric powder, the spice itself, it doesn't work nearly as well as the active ingredient, which is called curcumin. So I recommend taking that a couple of times a day, at least for a few weeks, to build up and reduce that inflammation in my clients, and then I can either lower it down completely or completely remove it. But curcumin is one of my favorite herbs, is why I put it inside of the Pyrlopurge. Not only does it help kill things like H. pylori, it also reduces inflammation and pain such as the ones you get when you get acid reflux inside the esophagus. But that curcumin has an effect all over the body. So even if you have joint pain, it can work really, really well. It's one of my top herbs to use. So there you have it, guys. Those are 13 strategies that you can use to eliminate bloating in your life. Hopefully you like these videos. Please like and subscribe and click that bell notification so you get notified when we go live again.